finances. And some of the issues that are coming out here, of course, most employees are very happy about it. Again, it varies with age groups and type of work, so very interesting. But what I want to highlight here is the dilemma for employers, especially employers that are running manufacturing plants, where there's some pocket of employees that have to be on site because of the nature of work. And some other employees have got flexibility to either work on site or off site. So how do we as employers moderate this or legislate around this so that working from home is not seen as a benefit to some employees? And then how then do we also regulate around important aspects of work, like, you know, why people work together is so that they can share values, they can share culture, they can communicate and work as one team. How then do we ensure, and you know, the HR guys were having a discussion on this, but the issue, how do we then drive a common culture? How do we drive a common understanding when we have our employees working remotely and managing through systems so that we can be able to still preserve the beauty of working on site? So those are some of the few issues that were coming to play as we observe COVID and as we continue to regulate and coming up with new policies to support the new changes.
We are probably going through the same thing across Africa. Is this what you're experiencing? Welcome.
Thank you. And from the Kingdom of Lesotho. Well, you will recall that at the beginning of this pandemic, most countries introduced across the continent where emergency laws were introduced, and these brought about enforcement by the police and the military, if you recall, and human rights abuses were observed, and there was no respect for the rule of law. So this is something that everyone, at least most African countries, experienced at the beginning of this pandemic. Now, secondly, business continuity. All of a sudden, businesses had to stop operating. This was new. I mean, when you set up a business, your expectation is that it will, you'll be able to sustain it for a lifetime. But on this occasion, we were forced to close businesses, and some businesses were categorized as essential services. So this is also something that that happened throughout the continent. Now, when it comes to the regulatory framework, we've had problems enforcing contracts, the inability of businesses to perform their obligations under their contracts. And just as the last speaker has spoken, we were thrashed into the area of breach of contract, suspension of contract clauses, and force majeure. We also had problems in terms of compliance, as the first speaker indicated. We were now unable to hold AGMs. We were unable to do disclosures in terms of the Companies Act and other various statutes. And this also is something that happened across the continent. Now, businesses again had financial problems in the continent, and indeed government did come in and request financial institutions to come about some relief measures, but this wasn't enough. And obviously, some companies were now seeing or experiencing eviction orders, because obviously, without the necessary cash coming in, businesses were unable to maintain their rental agreements. So these are things that we are seeing. Access to courts, someone talked about this. All of a sudden, we had no physical access to courts. And in the absence of that, we saw prison visits being prohibited and people's detention being extended for a while, for a bit longer. Then also we have problems relating to data protection. All of a sudden, we were informed that personal information, and specifically information pertaining to medical information regarding the results of tests. That then became a problem, as well as we were now seeing the collection and processing of medical information without any checks and balances. When it came to consumer protection as well, we saw prices rising, especially in the area of the services and protective clothing and things like that. So we also saw very high penalties being applied to those who raise their prices, and it also falls onto the area of competition law, where we found that our emergency laws now were talking to areas of competition and consumer protection laws, and very unfairly to businesses, I must say. And the first speaker also talked about insolvency. This is a very difficult area of the law. Businesses in most African countries, they just disappear if necessary, but all of a sudden they are thrust into the area of insolvency laws, and obviously they then had to take immediate action where they were experiencing distress and they needed to avoid liquidation. Corruption. With regard to corruption, this is an African problem, but it was also highlighted during the pandemic, in the sense that medical services had become very expensive, and the quality was reduced, and patients generally, their trust in health services was undermined. Now, and the WHO did talk to this issue of corruption and briberies in the health sector. Tax was also impacted a lot in the absence of business continuity. Obviously, we cannot pay taxes. This makes governments unable to meet its own obligations. And although we did receive pay-as-you-earn deferrals and some tax concessions and the extension of filing times and things like that, but ultimately most businesses in the African continent were unable to meet their obligations in terms of tax. Cybercrime, we have seen a rise in cybercrime. People are working from home and they're working from elsewhere, and they often use weaker cyber security measures on their home networks. So that is also a problem that the continent is facing. Telecommunications, if anything, this pandemic has shown us that we lack the necessary infrastructure. I'd like to put specific emphasis on mobile payment systems. We obviously need to improve that. Logistics, all of a sudden, African companies were then told about lists of goods that they were allowed or permitted to export, and some they were not allowed to export, which obviously affected business a lot. I think my colleagues have spoken to the issue of labor. I needn't go into that, but we also saw trade laws being affected, where we are unable to renew our permits, our licenses, because offices were closed. It talks to the issue of digitizing these systems. And then also importantly, we also saw cross-border trade being restricted. This every business relies on international trade and investment, and cross-border mobility. The absence of that just creates a big barrier to business. So generally, these are the things that have been affecting our continent and businesses within the continent. Archie, Trevor.
Well, thank you, Lindy.
Your greetings from the Kingdom of Lesotho have been well received. Please say hello to them as well. We'll come back to you for just closing remarks on this. But let me bring back Rita on this. Rita, you know, Mike had mentioned an issue around having a CBA, saying that the CBA is key because for them, more than 60% of their income is on recurrent expenditure. From where you stand, what kind of regulatory reforms are needed to ensure that the businesses become more resilient and productive at this time?
Trevor, it's very interesting. But what I can propose from where I sit is that the pandemic has taught us one lesson, and the big lesson is resilience. How, as a nation, we need to build our resilience to be able to cope with the future threats and risks, whether it is a healthcare related risk, terrorism, and all that. We could not access PPEs, for instance. How then can we be self-sufficient when we cannot be able to do that? So self-sufficiency is a core thing that we need to take away. And the core sufficiency in critical basic needs of society. Healthcare is at the forefront of that. Food security, and already we have our big four agenda, and the healthcare and food security have been identified as core pillars for this leadership season. I think exist in a system. So big four healthcare plus that we have seen with the pandemic, those are some of the areas that we need to be self-sufficient in. We should be able to take care of the health and safety of our citizenry. So to me, that is number one. Then there is the issue of food security, and the regulation and the policies around that need to be enhanced, because we're talking about agriculture as the backbone of our economy. And in this particular pandemic, we could not be able to feed our people. Corporates had to come together to support feeding programs to the needy. So agribusiness is a core opportunity for us to really deepen and to support, one, to be self-sufficient, and two, to grow our economy so that we can increase productivity. Productivity is a big issue, and then we can really improve our economy in general. SME development to me is big. We are talking about 1.8 million jobs have been lost. And remember, jobs were being lost before COVID. Many institutions had already started to do restructuring programs well before COVID. Because of digital transformation, we saw quite a bit of jobs being lost as a result of digitization in the banking industry and some other restructuring that come with that. So already a big population of very, very well educated, very well trained people have worked for business coming into the labor market with some form of skill. So I see a huge opportunity in developing this SME, and to regulate and to come up with incentives so that we can start to transition our informal to more formal business. And this group that is coming out of employment because of COVID or because of the digitization that has taken place is a very, very important pool that can help us to get to where we want to go. So regulations around this space is very, very critical. And there are pieces of legislations that are being tossed around, but they need to be fast-tracked and they become law. I see the startup bill, for instance, that Senator Sakaja is pushing. We need to support him to really make that into a reality, so that this gig economy we are talking about, that has become a reality in our life, is fast-tracked and create jobs and take up this huge population of Kenyans that is jobless. The other item is banking, and I see my friend Olaka in this conversation. And we need to, this Biashara Bank that we are talking about, that is going to support SME. When can it be in place so that these small businesses or medium-sized businesses can be able to access the much-needed credit so that they can scale up their business? Believe you me, when you talk about productivity, there is no individual who is more productive than an SME guy. So don't teach him about productivity, because if he does not work that day, he will not eat. So he's very, very productive, and the SME group ITEPSA keeps on talking to us about. Just facilitate them to access funding, to access technology, to access best practice, to access know-how, and they will do the rest of the work. So I think we have a big opportunity right here to scale up. The other area is on ICT that I see myself as one of the area that we grow. We need to move from 4G to 5G so that we can be able to connect. This pandemic has shown us that a huge population of our community was not able to access internet services. For instance, some employees working at home had such huge challenges to access the internet. So investment in that space is very, very critical, because everything we are doing it through the internet. Today we're having this conversation through the internet. So that level of connectivity, investment in that space is so key for us to be able to build resilience and to increase productivity. The other item is on the government side, funding our disaster prepared unit so that it really proactively prepare for disaster and not reactively trying to solve the issues, because the pandemic has shown us that if we are not prepared, another pandemic could arise and find us with challenges. So we need to strengthen authorities that are involved with the disaster management so that they can be able to support the country when it comes to risk of disease, terrorism, or whatever risk that might come our way, to be well equipped to take care of that. So Obidia can stop there and allow others to jump in.
Thank you, Rita. I'm going to take some of that and pass those thoughts on to Mike. Mike, the speakers and yourself are talking about those who were impacted, and we've noted that the talked about the transport sector, the educational sector, those who are heavily impacted, specific to the hospitality sector and specific to the MICE industry, to conferencing and meetings, which Kenya had already, as a destination, established itself as a substantive conference destination. How and when are we going to create legislation and regulation to cushion that industry? As you know, because Kenya was substantive in ensuring that we are a MICE destination, a lot of investment went into bricks and mortar, constructing these huge conference sites. And you've intimated that perhaps it now needs to move to smaller sites, but with high-end technology to allow for conferencing globally. Could you speak to that?
Thank you, Achi. The specific legislation that looks after MICE is the Tourism Act 2011. The only problem is that it doesn't address MICE as MICE. It addresses MICE as a subsector by creating the KICC, the International Convention Center. Probably it's a good time to rethink that particular clause. Instead of having a KICC, under which KICC will be a subset of that, because initially we had thought about putting up a center in Kisumu and put at the coast. So you'd have three good areas where one can cover Western and the Nyanza area, one can cover the city and its environs, and one can cover the coast. When you look at the immediate future, Achi, we don't see ourselves having very big, large meetings. But as investors, we must think of the long term. How will we be? Will we be in the same situation 5 years from now? Will we be in the same situation 10 years from now? And we've got to be ready. So if we are talking short to medium term, then we can look at smaller conference areas. Now remember, even these huge conference facilities, when you follow the proper protocols at the moment, government is telling us if you go to church a third of the capacity. If you go to a conference hall, a third of the capacity. If you probably they'll start opening up a sports stadium, and they'll tell us a third of the capacity. This is a scientific information that we have right now. It may not be true 3, 4 months, 5 months down the road. So we still need to be ready with our facilities and still be ready to take that position as a MICE destination. Now, there's other areas of legislation that can come in. The Labor Relations Act. For you to be an employer organization or a trade union, you need to have an office, a physical address. I think some years back you needed a physical phone number, a landline. So these are areas that we need to review because office space is becoming redundant. Probably we need to bring in the working from home situation. But there are also challenges working from home. Where do you work? Do you sit at your dining table? Is a dining chair the best place for you to be stuck 8 hours in Zoom meetings? Will you have back problems? So there is a lot of things that need to come in, and maybe just like we did with HIV and AIDS some years back, maybe we need to start thinking about mainstreaming pandemics into some of these laws, so that certain areas can be addressed, like stigma and access to health facilities and so on and so forth. So in terms of the industry itself, we see a very slow recovery. The good news is that we are seeing recovery. The good news is that we have certain areas that were ready, domestic market ready. We are seeing them doing very well. And these are areas such as Naivasha, such as Mombasa, Meru. Meru has never relied on international travel, yet you cannot find a hotel room on any weekend. You look at places like Kisumu, for example, which is heavily reliant on local travel. The domestic ready areas are recovering. The ones that were not domestic ready or decided that their strategy would rely too much on the international market, those are the ones that we are seeing will take a hit and will be sluggish in recovery. But we still need to develop these huge conference areas. We still need a MICE policy. The CS Balala has formed the Kenya National Convention Bureau. But this is not anchored in any law, so maybe we need to anchor it into the Tourism Act when we do review. And as the saying goes, why waste a crisis? Take advantage of a good crisis and streamline the issues that you could not have streamlined without a crisis. And we did that after 2008. We came up with a constitution. After 2017, we have BBI. Why waste this one? Pandemic. Let's streamline the things that we would to our advantage, but let's not make it, because we are seeing other countries, just to finish, Archie, we are seeing other countries turn this into an non-tariff barrier. So where you could visit before by a simple issue of a visa, now you're told you need a COVID test before you leave. You need another COVID test when you arrive. You need to sit in a hotel room for 14 days. You need another COVID test before you go back. And, you know, it's becoming an non-tariff barrier. Let's not waste the crisis on creation of non-tariff barriers. Thank you.
Let's not waste a crisis, indeed. And this is also something that Rita brought up earlier on, that there are pieces of legislation, but we need to have them galvanized. And let me bring in Lindiwe on this. So even though the cards are still up in the air right now as we speak, we're still trying to ensure these pieces of legislation are put together. You know, enterprises are still looking at you as the employers organizations in Africa to help them sail through. So what are some of those specific reforms that employers organizations are advocating for in the emerging new normal right now to speed up the enterprise recovery?
Okay, thank you. Let me start with my favorite, which is social dialogue. We are advocating for social dialogue. We are saying that for economic recovery, you need the tripartite structures. We need to sit around a table and discuss issues. And I take it from Kenya, the last speakers showing that there are collective bargaining agreements around the area of this pandemic. These are necessary. And then we're also going to be advocating for the promotion of labor market flexibility. We need to review our working conditions. We need to introduce flexi time, flexi work, working from home, and basically we also need to have laws that allow us in times like these to change terms and conditions of employment and change collective agreements as well. And we need to promote employment creation. And with this, I believe we need to ease doing business in our different countries. What this means, it means that we need to reduce the administrative burdens and bureaucratic obstacles that stand in the way of business startups. We need to reduce corporate taxes. We need to create more employment. We need to set up investment in infrastructure and development. We also need to accelerate online platforms and e-platforms, especially in government, in terms of the various public administration duties that are there. And obviously, we need to also start negotiating reduction in tariffs and digitizing and automating border processes as it is, and expediting certification procedures when it comes to the borders. And then apart from that, I think Professor Mtunzi talked at length about the issue of productivity. We definitely need to lobby for for productivity incentives, for research and development, and skills development. I remember there was an entire topic on the issue of skills development and training, and of course performance-based pay. Now, what is also important, and something that I've seen in my own country where we didn't have a proper social security scheme, we need to lobby for the revisiting of social protection. You'd find that employers are not represented in some of these structures. It is necessary that we are there so that we guide the process in terms of bringing about improvements in the area of healthcare, the protection of jobs, and the mitigation of income loss, specifically because on this occasion, we saw how many people lost their income. Rita talked about the issue of transitioning from the informal to the formal economy. We need to lobby for this. We need to lobby very strongly for this, because with it comes the issue of infrastructure. With it comes the issue of improving institutions, and obviously the issue of in transaction costs and various other issues that, if improved, will improve the ease of doing business. Now, also, we talked about enhancing occupational health and safety. I think various speakers have spoken to this. It's necessary that some of these issues, such as social distancing, workplace hygiene, and things like that, are institutionalized at the end of the day. Public procurement, we have to source from within nowadays, because that's the only way we can improve the creation of jobs. Cybercrime, I've talked about that as well. We'll be lobbying for improved guidelines with regard to that, with regard to detection, investigation, and generally the criminal justice system as a whole. So indeed, I would like to join Rosa in saying that every cloud has a silver lining. We need to take advantage of this pandemic to improve the laws that we have. We need to bring about or lobby for regulatory reforms in order for business to build resilience, because we never know, and another pandemic might be coming soon. So basically, we'll be lobbying in that direction, Archie and Trevor.
All right. Thanks, Lindiwe.
Been quiet for a while, just out of curiosity, because you're the one who kick-started this entire conversation, and this was brought up by Rita Kavashe earlier on, that there are pieces of legislation here and there, but how then do we galvanize them into something concrete that then can enable both the industry and the employees to feel safe?
Trevor, you ask a good question, because over the years we've suffered from piecemeal legislation, and nobody really knows which law you should look at. Just like Mike said, for example, for labor relations, we have 5 acts, 5 of them, and sometimes you don't know how one relates with the other. Sometimes there are contradictions between one and the other. So what I think is important to do for business laws is to have a platform that allows for consolidation, and for you to be able to know, if I want to think about employment, this is where I get it, and it's comprehensive, the laws speak to each other, or even are collapsed into one another. Think about areas of, for example, telecommunication. You'll find that someone doing something in the telecommunication space needs to think about business laws that are all over the place. And so what I think needs to be a deliberate effort done and pushed by private sector working together with government is just a consolidation of relevant laws, and the consolidation needs to be done around a streamlined areas of interest or areas of topic or industry levels. And I think galvanizing them and putting them together is one thing, Trevor. The thing that we lack a lot is capacity.